My goodness, I have a stack full of eyeshadow palettes, and these are all eyeshadow palettes that are neutral with a twist. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to today's video. If you are new here, I am Stacy. I feature unfiltered makeup opinions and honest reviews, and today we are talking about neutral palettes with a twist. What do we mean by neutral palettes with a twist? So I had been wanting to film this video for a while, but I actually saw that Rachel Palmieri did a rendition of this. I really got inspired by Rachel's video to compile my own list of palettes that are like neutral with a twist. These are palettes to me that have kind of a neutral color story, but they aren't necessarily like your browns that come in like a typical neutral palette. So let's get into this video and let's talk about some of these palettes. I have some indie brands, I have some mainstream brands, I have some high end. There's a lot. The first one I'm going to talk about is actually one that really isn't neutral, but to me, it screams kind of like a neutral concept and a neutral color story. And the one that I'm talking about is the Muse palette from Cosmic Brushes. And as you can see, like the packaging is like a flower. It's very, florally and beautiful. But when you open it up inside, this is what you get. Now, it doesn't look like a neutral palette, but to me, this is a neutral palette because there are so many different combinations of like neutral eyeshadow looks or like everyday looks that you can get with this eyeshadow palette. And I feel like, yes, with it being kind of like, the organization of this is a little bit off, but let me explain. Let me explain. I love a really beautiful, more neutral pink eye. And this palette has such a variety of like pink shades in it. You have like a really beautiful mauve pink. You have this almost duo, it's like a duochrome from a pink to a yellow. And then you also have this really beautiful, almost like lavender shade. It's almost like a lilac lavender. It's like a pinky purple shade in there. And you can create a very easy, very neutral pink look with this. Now that's not the only thing that you can create with this. There's green shades in here if you want to create kind of like a green neutral eye. There is also some just like this is like a deeper, almost like brownish purple shade, and you can create a really nice like dimensional look with that. But overall, like, okay, yes, it looks a little bit busy, but when you actually break down the colors that are in this palette, there's a lot of like colors that you can use to create some everyday, more neutral leaning looks. Yes, you could go kind of over the top. You could add a pop of purple, you could add a pop of green, like a really light green. But even then, like, there's still a lot of shades in this palette that you can use to create such a almost like neutral eyeshadow look, but like with these beautiful colors. Like, I have a kind of a neutral I have kind of a mini eyeshadow palette, and I really felt like this one was like neutral with a twist because I love this eyeshadow palette, especially during this time of year. And I have the 9 pan palette, the Ivy palette from Sigma Beauty. This eyeshadow palette is so simple and it's definitely neutral with a twist. Like, if you're not really comfortable playing with a lot of color in your eyeshadow looks, this is actually a really good palette to kind of like start dipping into or even just playing a little bit with neutrals. The thing that I love most about this is that you still have some of those like neutral brown shades in there, but you do have this absolutely amazing, it's like a blue green teal, deep, 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 deep teal shade. And then you also have some green like foil shades in here. This one's almost like a hollow. It's like glittery. It's so pretty. This is definitely a neutral with a twist palette. It does have some great like neutral shades in there. So if you aren't really wanting to play with color that day, you do have these already like neutral shades, but it's so neutral with a twist. This, like, screamed out at me when I was going through my eyeshadow palettes, and I was like, "This is definitely neutral with a twist." That one you can purchase right now, and Sigma has a whole bunch of, like, 9 pan palettes that are absolutely stunning for any kind of eyeshadow look, and they have a really good play on, like, neutral with a twist. 2 indie eyeshadow palettes. I think I have mentioned them before, I think in my Cosmos video when I did, like, a whole review of the of the Anastasia Cosmos palette. I mentioned this. And the palettes I'm talking about are from What's Up Beauty. So I originally fell in love with this brand only because I loved the color story of the Geodes palette, which is, to me, like, the packaging really reminded me of the Rose Quartz palette from Huda Beauty, which I also own. But when I actually opened it up inside, like, this definitely reminded me of, like, neutral with a twist. And the What's Up Beauty formula is just, it's so good across the board. It's an amazing formula. This one does have some neutral shades in here. You have like a pop of yellow. You also have a really deep dark brown. This one's like an olivey green. And then you have some like neutral shades over here, some taupey, some warm, some like kind of like cooler tone shades. And then you have these amazing multi-chrome, dual chrome, and foily formulas. This is so, this looks like a geode that you find, like a rock geode. And that's really honestly why I love this palette so much, is because you can create a very like neutral look with it, or you can go the colorful route with it. It is such a high quality formula. It's so much smaller compared to some of my 12 shade eyeshadow palettes, and it is so easy to use, easy to blend out. And honestly, like, this is also an eyeshadow palette that you could take out during the holiday time because it has those like iridescent like multi-chromes and duochromes in here and those beautiful foil shades. It's such a beautiful palette. This is definitely neutral with a twist. But they also have another eyeshadow palette. It's the Monsoon palette. This one actually came out, I believe, before the Geodes palette, but I have both of them. This is also another, I mean, this is neutrals with a twist, but it has those brown shades in here so you can create a neutral look if you really want to, but then it offers the beautiful blue foil, the purple foil. It has some duochromes in here. It has a really like a cute little pop of pink. And this is literally just like a desert, like it reminds me of a desert monsoon, like a storm during a desert, during the desert. But the color story in this one as well is definitely like you could go neutral, or you could go with a twist. You could use it to create a really beautiful, almost like colorful eyeshadow look without being too colorful. Let's step away from indie brands for a minute. Let's talk about one that you can find at Ulta Beauty. And I actually found out that this palette is on sale on Colourpop right now, which really makes me sad because it's actually like their final sale, which means that they're discontinuing it. But if you really want neutral with a twist, if you want an eyeshadow palette that offers a little bit of color, but also you can create some like everyday neutral looks, definitely reach for Lust for Dusk from Colourpop. This is a beautiful eyeshadow palette. I picked this up because it is actually a dupe for the Anastasia Beverly Hills Rose Metals. I'm pretty sure it is. I still have to like swatch them side by side, but it has a very similar color story. Rose Metals is more grungy, 90s, very, very neutral leaning. But this one, Lust for Dusk, while it does have that like neutral color story, you also have some pops of orange in here. You have pops of pink and purple. You have a gray in here. So it's not like your typical brown neutral eyeshadows by any means at all. Like, this is definitely one more leaning on like purples and those orangier browns. And then you also have some like beautiful pops of like orange in here. So this is definitely like, you could, I don't think of this as a neutral palette simply because it has like those burnt oranges and it's not all neutral in here, but it's definitely like neutral. This is like the most like neutral out of these, but to me it's still not like a true neutral palette. This has some color to it and you could do some really beautiful like sunset looks with this, like purple to orange, even like some really dark smoky eyes with like purple in there and like the orange as well. So this is like the most like neutral palette that I have in here, but it's not neutral. It's neutral with a twist. Now, the other eyeshadow palette I wanted to mention is actually more of a luxury brand, more of like a higher end brand, and it is the Natasha Denona Yucca palette. I did a full review on this. Absolutely like huge full review on this. This is a 15 shade eyeshadow palette from Natasha Denona. It retails for $69. You can purchase it right now. But the thing I love the most about this is that it is green leaning. And not a lot of not a lot of brands have done like green leaning eyeshadows. And green is such an easy transition to go from like if you're more of like a brown neutral person. Some of these greens are very easy to transition into if you're more accustomed to like a neutral eyeshadow palette. I have tutorials of this. I have 3 looks, 1 palette. I have a swatch comparison video. So if you guys don't particularly like this color story, or if you think you might have something really similar in your collection, I do have videos on this palette. But you have a pop of teal in here. You have this really beautiful chartreuse. You have this beautiful like chartreuse, bright poppy, yellowy green shade. And then you also have pops of like an orangey yellow. You have some cream to powders in here. And then you have these amazing foil shades that look wet on your eyes. Like they're just so beautiful. But this honestly is such a like, it's colors, but you can go every day with it. You can go kind of neutral with it. It's so fun to play with. Out of all of these palettes, that is probably the most expensive palette that I had pulled out for this video. It's $69. Okay, I want to talk about another indie brand. I just featured them on my channel, and technically, this is sold out. But I had to mention it because it is neutrals with a twist. I'm wearing it today. Can you tell that it's like it looks like a neutral eye look, like that I wore this to, go do some work. Like I wore this today and I don't feel too over the top, but I feel like this palette could go more over the top, or you can keep it more everyday looking. And the palette I'm talking about is Echoes in Darkness from Sinful Echoes. This is definitely neutrals with a twist. So I broke this shade, I shattered it, and I don't really want to hold it up like all the way because it's still kind of loose, even though I pressed it back in there. But this eyeshadow palette is neutrals with a twist. You have this absolutely stunning like taupey shade right here that's a great transition shade, especially if you're lighter toned like me. It's almost like a gray taupey shade. I love it for my transition shade, but it's not limited to that. This green shade, although it is kind of like a minty shade, it's actually not, it's almost like a pea shade. It's almost minty, but it also has that like olivey undertone. Very easy to use as like a transition as well. Yellow is becoming like, for me, like putting a yellow in my crease has just become like such a fun thing to do to like really brighten up an eyeshadow look. Even if I'm using browns for the day, or if I'm using a green shade, or even sometimes if I'm using like a red shade, because it's almost becoming to me like a new like transition shade because it plays well with so many other colors. And then you also have these deeper tones in here as well. So you have a deeper red, a really deep, beautiful like emeraldy green. You have a really, really dark like espresso brown, and then you have this beautiful olivey green shade, and then you have these amazing foils and duochromes down below, which really just like amps up your look to like the next level. But these are not by any means like super colorful in a good way. Like they're really easy to twist and make more like a neutral palette. Like if you guys haven't seen my review of these Sinful Echoes, like my first impression, I definitely suggest you go check that out because I did more of a like neutral leaning eyeshadow look that day. Played with a whole bunch of greens, played with some of the foil shades, played with some of the duochromes, like, and I did play with the duochrome shade today. As you guys can see, it's on my lids, but it's just like a very subtle, beautiful, like natural look, but it's not too over the top. And it's definitely one of those palettes where you can create something that's more neutral leaning, but at the end of the day, you can also create something really, really grungy and colorful, which is what I really like about this palette. This one in particular is definitely more of a like grungy colorful because of all those like super dark shades in here. But again, like it's such an easy palette to use and dress up as like a colorful yet not colorful outfit. I have 2 palettes left, but they are both from the same brand, the same collection, and these were released in 2023. But both of these, when I saw them, I was like, those are great palettes, and you can get really beautiful, like, neutral looks with them. And you guys might have guessed, I don't know. These are the Stone and Rock palette and the Jewels and Gem palette. These are both from Oden's Eye. They are part of the George's Divine collection. So let's take a look at Stone and Rock first, because I actually had this palette as a comparison to the Yucca palette, and I did a whole swatch video on that. So again, go check that out. I also have like a full review and some tutorials with this palette and with Jewels and Gem. So this palette, it plays on the green neutral side of a color story. It is really easy to come up with like neutral leaning greens, just like the Yucca palette. I feel like this one does have some things that the Yucca palette is kind of missing. Like you have this awesome, like almost hollowy, gritty, grungy, like blackish gray foil shade. That's really fun to play with. You also have this really deep dark, almost like black is black. Very beautiful. You also have this really nice like grungy brown shade in here. But this palette overall, like even this shade, this one's like a duochrome, so it shifts from a blue to a green. If you guys are seeing that or not. And it kind of has like a purple in there. So it's almost like a multi-chrome. But this palette is very easy to dress up, dress down. You can make it look like a really green neutral color story, or you can actually use it and make it like really, really bright and playful, which is one thing that I love about this palette. Like I just love this palette. I think overall, like Oden's Eye has such a great formulation, but the Stone and Rock palette is more like, do you like greens? Do you like blues? And it's like blue-green color story. It's definitely like colorful, but it's not colorful at the same time. It's definitely one of those palettes that you can transition and it can be neutral, but it has colors in it. And then the last one that I wanted to mention is also part of the George's Divine collection, and it is like I said, it is the Jewels and Gem palette. This one screams to me like wedding makeup like no other. Wedding makeup to me is a really neutral color story, but some people really like that rose gold look, or they like a purple eyeshadow look for their wedding day. And that has become more of a trend in recent years. And that's what this palette reminds me of, is that like purpley gold wedding makeup look. Look, I would use this for wedding makeup because it's so pretty. It has a pop of red in here, but it's like a brick red, very dark, very sultry. You also have this shade, which is a little bit lighter in tone than the shade down here. You have like a couple purple shades in here. I really love this shade. It's called Ecstasy, and it's actually one of my favorite shades. It's a very cool toned purple, and it looks really nice on people who are more fairer skin toned, who are cooler toned like me. I'm very like cool toned, but you can take this shade, this shade, this shade, and pop this in the inner corner. You are good to go. Like that could be your neutral look. But let me just take you one step further. You could even use some of these like blue and green shades with maybe this in the crease, pop something like this or this on the inner corner, and it's still more of a neutral look, even though you're using color. Like it's just so pretty. And then you have obviously like the blue shades, but blues and purples to me, depending on how you put them on your face, they can also translate kind of muted and neutral and absolutely stunning. Like this palette overall is just so fun to play with. It definitely is one that I'm like, I'm pretty sure I could create like a wedding makeup look with this, even though it looks colorful. It looks like it has some richness and rich color and pigmentation to it, but it definitely is like kind of muted. And up on my channel, I do have like my top like neutral palettes, and these are like true neutral palettes. They're like browns, light browns, dark browns, like all of the browns that you can think of, just like true to neutral palettes. That's what they are. That's all they are. But I have my top neutral palettes that I've already posted on my channel. And here we have a whole stack of my top like neutral palettes with a twist. These are all palettes that you can create like a neutral eyeshadow look with a twist, like adding a pop of color. Even just taking like one of these eyeshadow palettes like the Yucca palette and creating like a green eyeshadow look, but it still looks a little bit neutral, a little bit neutral. And these are definitely like neutral palettes with a twist. These are so fun to play with. Especially if you're more of a neutral lover, you haven't really like chanced yourself with color yet. These are great palettes to get started with playing with color. I found that like my love for color has grown, using neutral palettes with a twist. Definitely hit that subscribe button if you guys want to see more content from me. I feature indie brands, unfiltered makeup opinions, and honest reviews. So I hope you guys will consider subscribing to my channel, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.